Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. You know the rules. Go and get yourself something sparkling and effervescent, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. This is part 2 of yesterday's story. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with yesterday's story. "Not good at the moment," says my husband, his voice choking up with tears. "Well, that's what the doctor says the prognosis is. He says it doesn't look good, but that things could potentially change. He says that I should keep talking to my wife, that she might be able to listen. She might hear us." "You mean she could hear us now?" says my mother, sounding startled. "Well, it's a distinct possibility. Anyway, the doctor says it's early days, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a wait-and-see game. Only time will tell how well she is and if she does recover." My mother groans. "I can't bear seeing my daughter like this. The not knowing if she's going to make a full recovery is killing me. What if our baby dies? What then? What if we're forced to switch the machine off? If she can't breathe on her own?" "Shh," says my father. "Don't talk like that, Erica. Supposing she can hear us." Piers' account. For years I had not been desperately thrilled with my wife slipping out in the evenings with our dogs for a walk in the countryside. In the beginning I had surreptitiously followed her to ensure that she was perfectly safe. If she had known that I'd been following her, she would have almost certainly been infuriated and aggrieved. But in the end I believed she was safe. I foolishly persuaded myself I was overreacting, and my wife knew exactly what she was doing. And on all of her walks she took her cell phone with her, and some bear spray for her own personal protection, should she feel threatened in any way. I had no reason to believe she would come into any kind of harm. JJ is a very independent woman, who won't be easily bullied by anyone. She has a mind all of her own and likes to make her own choices in life. I had always given her that invaluable space that she needed, something that had been lacking in her previous relationship, where her ex-fiancé's jealous possessiveness had almost certainly driven her away. She felt she could not breathe in that suffocatingly cramped, airless, cloying relationship. We lived in a rural location, and the dirt road that led to the woodgrove was precariously bumpy, bespeckled with rocks and stones, but I never had reason to believe that my wife would ever be unsafe. Now I was being judged by my prescriptive, captious mother-in-law, who didn't hesitate to tell me exactly what she thought of me. There wasn't much love lost between the two of us, especially when my mother-in-law clandestinely blamed me for the breakup of JJ's former relationship to the previous man in her life, Eli Conway. Eli Conway was every mother's dream for their daughter, rich, successful, good-looking, and incredibly charming. And most importantly of all, Eli Conway had adored JJ, but the problem was he loved her so much that she couldn't breathe in that relationship. She felt as if Eli Conway's hawk eyes would be hovering over her day and night, so that any privacy she might have enjoyed was stolen from her, and she sensed that every minute of her day was scrutinized by Eli, as if she was a science project that he was studying, like observing the habits of bald eagles, from their rising up in the morning to their settling down in the evening. JJ sometimes felt like a beautiful bird trapped in a gold-gilded cage with clipped wings that could not fly. My wife had told me that her mother had adored Eli Conway, and in her eyes her soon-to-be son-in-law could do absolutely no wrong. When JJ broke up with Eli, and soon became engaged to me, her mother saw me as a treacherous, duplicitous person who had stolen her daughter away from the love of her life. She blamed me for the demise of her daughter's relationship with Eli. The truth, of course, was very different, as my wife had ended it with Eli by leaving him a long, explanatory, rather apologetic note, explaining as why the relationship could not work between the two of them, as she had felt suffocated by him. She knew if she spoke to him personally, he would have successfully somehow manipulated her to stay with him, but she was not happy in that relationship, and she wanted an easy way out. My wife felt as if a heavy, ponderous weight had automatically been lifted off her shoulders after she ended her 2-year engagement to Eli. And even the air in her lungs felt crisper and fresher, the world more colourful and inviting. She had been discharged and released from the shackles of her emancipation, and it was like her imprisoned, clipped wings had finally grown back and she could fly again. She felt she needed a break to celebrate her brand new freedom, her newfound independence, her acquittal and liberation from being tethered to the same mooring place every day. So she'd gone on holiday to Tampa Bay in Florida with her best friend Louise. It would seem that serendipitously, I was at the right place at the right time, when the hands of fate would smile down on me, in ways I had never deemed possible. I was swimming in the ocean one day, bouncing up against the waves. It was beautiful, the weather great, the water pleasantly warm, the breakers very feisty. Let's just say Clearwater Beach on the Gulf Coast was spectacular, with its pristine ribbon of white sand, lined by a beach boardwalk that led to the pier. When I was swimming in the water, I could hear a young woman scream. It was JJ. She had stood on a jellyfish and was in dreadful pain. I instinctively carried her out of the water, took her discreetly behind a rock, and told her not to look while I peed on her sting. I have since learnt that a jellyfish sting can actually be aggravated rather than helped by urine. Suffice to say, that was how we actually met, and JJ assured me that my urine had relieved the pain. Whether it really had, I'm not exactly sure. I think she was trying to be kind. But the sting was eventually treated with cortisone cream, and that is really what did the trick. Needless to say, to thank me for my kindness, JJ invited me for a drink at her hotel, and let's just say the rest is history. My wife will often say to anyone who asks about how we met, "He peed over my foot, and I married him. There must have been something magical in that golden shower." I'll never forget on our wedding day how angry Erica looked. She was not your typical bride's mother, delighted for her daughter to be married. On the contrary, she looked like a disgruntled walrus who was going to a funeral rather than a wedding. She was a formidable stout woman with a square-shaped torso and very skinny legs that rather reminded me of a chicken. She wore her clothes far too tight, and on this occasion it was no different. She was wearing a purple dress that was clinging to her like a shiny support stocking, so when she moved with indignation, every part of her body just jiggled like a jelly. I remember after we got married, she came up to me and said, "If you dare upset my daughter, Piers, I'll kill you myself. Do you understand? You stole my daughter away from her true love, and I will never forgive you for that. Never." And despite my wife's best efforts, she could never convince her mother any differently. "Mum, I never loved Eli. Can't you get that? He wasn't right for me. It's Piers I love." "Nonsense, sweetheart. You don't know what you're talking about. You've let go of the very best thing that ever happened to you." Me and my wife had only been married for 5 years when this fortuitous accident had occurred. I remember she'd been marking homework on the settee. She looked up at me and said, "I'm so stiff from sitting in the same position for so long. I need to stretch out my legs. I'm going to take the dogs for a walk. I have to get some fresh air." Our dogs know the meaning of the word walk as much as they know what we purchase from the butchers when we return home from the store. The word walk represents freedom, exploration, adventure, and all kinds of exciting smells for them. The dogs begin to bark excitedly, their tails wagging, and my wife puts on her walking boots. She smiles warmly at me. "Keep an eye on the beef casserole, will you? Switch the oven off if I'm not back in 30 minutes, she says, kissing me on the cheek. I watch her leave and settle down myself to watch a sports game on television. It must have been 10 minutes later. I hear this frantic scratching sound at the front door. So I quickly dash to open the door, and our 2 dogs bolt into the house, both of them trembling and beginning to cower under the furniture. I'd never seen my dogs so shaken up before. They seemed terrified by something. They kept looking towards the door, almost as if they were expecting something to bolt right through it. Their idiosyncratic behaviour sent chills running down my spine, as in that moment I knew something quite dreadful had happened to my wife. I immediately dashed out of the front door and out of the house, and down the long road with my torch. There are no street lights, so it was dark, but the moonlight was generous. A cool breeze was blowing, and there was a repugnant smell in the air that smelt quite revolting, like decaying flesh. At first I didn't see my wife anywhere. I flashed my torchlight around the road frantically, and then I see this crumpled heap lying in the middle of the road. I immediately run over to my wife. My heart is doing flip-flops, and there's a hollow, vacuous pit in my stomach. I find her lying unconscious, covered with deep gouges and scratches. There's blood all over her torn clothes, and she was non-responsive. In truth, she looked dead. I remember feeling as if everything had been sucked out of me. I tried to slap my wife's cheek to get some kind of a reaction from her, but she didn't respond. And when I began to feel for a pulse, I felt nothing. My heart was thumping and thundering in my chest, and I was trembling so much that even dialing the emergency number was a strain for me. I was certain my wife was dead. I knew something monstrously huge must have attacked her. But what? I could not fathom. When I waited for the EMTs to arrive, I was fearing the very worst. And it didn't help that their sober, grim expressions portrayed the kind of hopeless look you see in people when they're resigned to the fact that things are not going to end well. At first they didn't get a pulse, and then one of the EMTs shouted, "I've got a pulse! I've got a pulse! It's very faint, but I've got one!" They quickly ferried me and my wife into the ambulance and to the hospital. My heart was heavy as we made the crucial journey to the hospital, while I held my wife's hand in mine. And even in that pivotal point in time, it was the not knowing that was the most tormenting thing of all. Was my wife going to live? Was she going to die? What was going to happen to her? I didn't cry at first when I saw my wife in this state. I was too numb for that, in such a dreadful daze, that all my actions were robotic. I tried hard not to engage my thoughts. I had a sense that I was caught up in a nightmare from which I would surely awaken, as everything that happened became like a hazy blur to me. That evening at the hospital, medics came and went. Doctors spoke to me, and the world passed me by, like when you're asleep on a bus and you get a vague sense of activity going on around you, which you remember few details. It took me several hours to bounce out of my delusional state of denial and admit to myself that this was really happening, that my wife was in hospital. And no, this wasn't a dream that had morphed into a dreadful nightmare. This was real. The thought of losing my beloved wife was overwhelming, but when the doctor told me there was a glimmer of light at the end of the dark tunnel, I snatched those bright words of light, refusing to let them go. As when the bread of hope is offered to you, however small the portion may be, it's not something you ever turn away. You savour the flavour, you chew every mouthful, refusing to allow the poisonous bitter taste of a scathing, cynical doubt to contaminate or defile your faith. This was why talking to my wife during this arduous ordeal, even though in a hospital bed covered in bandages and attached to tubes of every kind, and not even resembling the woman I knew or loved, I knew it was very significant to keep her abreast of everything going on outside her hospital bed. I think talking to her helped me believe that she was actually coming back to me. I was certain that somewhere, somehow, my wife could hear me. That beyond all these tubes that were attached to her, and the apparatus that was breathing for her, maybe she would hear my words. She looked so fragile, so delicate, so vulnerable, like a badly bruised doll that had deteriorated from being left out in the elements for far too long, weathered by the sun, damaged by the rain, chewed and scratched up by the dog. When I touched her body, she remained limp and rather unresponsive. Of course, it hadn't helped that Erica had capriciously laid into me, like a ton of bricks, blaming me for my wife's enfeebled prostate condition. Talk about kicking a dog while it's down. But that was Erica for you. The woman didn't pack any punches. She told you exactly what she thought. She didn't give a damn how much offence she caused in the process. Subtlety was not exactly one of her redeeming qualities, and tact was as alien to her as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Suffice to say, I think Clayton was embarrassed by his wife's unbridled tongue, which seemed to sprout glass shards as cutting sharp, abrasive, condescending, and very hurtful words were hurled directly at me, like darts being flung violently at the bullseye. She was even laying into the doctors, claiming they weren't doing enough for her daughter. I assure you, Mrs. Brown, we're doing everything we can to help your daughter. But right now, as I keep telling you, it's a waiting game, the doctor had informed her. But Erica had put her hands defiantly on her hips, rolled her eyes in exasperation, and glared at the doctor, as if suddenly he had become her greatest foe. Why hasn't medicine moved on, Doc? Are we still stuck in the Dark Ages? Why the hell can't you do something to get my daughter to wake up? Is medicine this incompetent? I understand your frustration, Mrs. Brown, he had said. Medicine has advanced significantly, I assure you, in leaps and bounds. But all I can say is that Coma has its own set of rules. It's not dictated by medicine or science. Your daughter's recovery is rarely based on her own body's ability to regenerate itself and to heal. We can only hope and pray that she will make a full recovery. What, Doc, if she doesn't ever wake up? What then? What if she never comes out of this coma? Look, Mrs. Brown, let's not go there now, shall we? Let's take it one step at a time, shall we? Before we jump through hoops, reaching all kinds of crazy conclusions. Clayton took me to one side and apologised for his wife's behaviour. I'm so sorry, Pierce. Erica always had a bee in her bonnet about you. She never got over JJ not marrying Eli. I'm very glad she didn't, I have to say. Anyway, she decided from the word go she never liked you, so there's nothing you can do or say to make her agreeable with you. My advice is to not let it get you down. Her bark is a lot worse than her bite, I assure you. Ostensibly, I was feeling responsible for my wife's dreadful plight, wishing that I could go back in time and change everything, with the benefit of hindsight. But then that's such a waste of time, isn't it? You can't ever undo what has happened. So what's the point in any of that? Later that evening I returned home to get some much-needed rest and give our furry companions some attention and food. Let's just say the serendipitous inauspicious events of the last 48 hours or so had worn me out to a frazzle, and I was beginning to drop with exhaustion. I was that tired. I wisely decided to research online how to make poached chicken, as last time I cooked it was an absolute disaster. And this time my two cats were looking at me with a little more appreciation as they hungrily gobbled up their food that looked surprisingly tender. See, I told them, I'm not a complete hopeless cause. I can cook chicken now. So I don't want any more rats under my bed tonight. Do you understand? My cats both gave me that bemused look, and I think I'd made my point very clear. That evening, I decided to cook myself something to eat. I wasn't hungry, but I cooked pasta shells with Italian tomato sauce and Parmesan cheese. I realised I hadn't eaten a thing for over 48 hours. I needed to get some solid food in my stomach to keep my strength up. But once I'd thrown the meal together, I sank back into our soft, comfortable leather couch, leaving the steaming plate of pasta to cool on the coffee table, as it was too hot to eat at the minute. I must have drifted off to sleep so quickly. I awoke with a jolt in the pitch-black darkness. I had fallen asleep on the couch. I briefly glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I could hardly believe it. I'd fallen asleep at 7 o'clock and had slept for a full 7 hours. I had been out for the count, as finally my body had demanded sleep, and I had no say in the matter. All the curtains had not been drawn, which meant the soft ethereal moonlight was filtering through the living room, so I could discern the shapes of the chairs and the coffee table, but I could see no sign of my dogs or cats, who would usually be sleeping in the same room as me. Our Labrador Maddox would be lying by my feet snoring, and our Yorkshire Terrier Snoopy would be fast asleep on my lap, but there was no sign of them anywhere. Furthermore, our 2 ginger cats would normally be curled up on the sofa beside me, but this evening all my animals had done a disappearing act and were estranged. I was more than a little befuddled, as this was incongruous behaviour for them. I climb out of the couch, stretching my stiff body out, eyeing the cold pasta on my plate, and reminding myself that I had forgotten to eat it, but I had absolutely no appetite, and the cold pasta looked as appealing as a plate of cat kibble. I decided to walk over to the living room curtains to draw them, and that was when I saw him. In that moment, I knew that I was looking at the very creature that had attacked my wife. Now he was looking in at me. This audacious creature did not hold back on its cocky impertinence and its arrogant demeanour. It had its face pressed against the window of the living room and was looking brazenly right in at me with glowing red eyes. I could see the scandalous, malignant creature clearly, as the motion-activated lights were fully on, so I could see the back lawn in our yard. There are no words to describe this objectionable, repugnant creature to you. Only he was bipedal, standing up like a man at 10 foot tall, 4 feet across the shoulders, with the head of a wolf, the body of a man. He had odious, contemptuous eyes that blazed a bright red colour. This detestable creature looked like he'd been regurgitated from the gates of hell itself, for he was wearing evil on his face like you or I might wear an accessory like a hat or a scarf. His reprehensible expression was malevolent, and his sharp, piercing canine teeth were fully exposed as he smiled at me vindictively with an affronting expression that said only 7 words to me. "I just want to eat you." After everything that had happened to me in the last 48 hours, I felt no fear, only an insatiable rage coursing through my body, like a steam train on full throttle that wasn't about to stop any time. This creature had left my wife for dead, had terrified my dogs out of their wits, and was now trying to scare me. I immediately grabbed my rifle and dashed out into the backyard. This creature began to lunge towards me, but I felt no fear, no reservation, only furious anger. This creature might want to eat me, but I wanted him dead more than anything else in the world. And so I began to indiscriminately fire at the creature, and my bullets successfully seared his flesh. I knew those wounds were fatal, as the creature let out the most god-awful scream, and scuttled away into the woods, clutching his leg. But I knew in minutes he'd bleed out, and in the morning I would find his deceased body. So consumed with exhaustion, I returned to the house to find my dog Maddox, the black Labrador, cowering in our closet, and Snoopy and the 2 cats hiding under my bed, looking at me through frightened eyes. The next morning when I went to look for the deceased wolf-like creature, there was no sign of him at all, but there was so much blood everywhere. He was definitely dead, but there was no body to be found anywhere. The next morning, for the first time ever, since my wife had been taken into hospital, my dogs ventured out of doors, and they knew that the imposing threat had gone. How they knew this, I don't know. Maybe they could pick up the scent of death on the wind, and just knew he was gone. Who knows what dogs think? But their fear dissipated like the smoke from a chimney, and they once again returned to their former ebullience, as if nothing had happened at all. And once again the cats were in their usual good form as they waited for me to fill their bowls with cat tuna. Back to JJ. In my hospital bed, I can't move a muscle, nor can I twitch an eyelash, or even move a finger, or cry out to the staff. That even though I'm in a body, locked in a body, that refuses to cooperate with the signals in my brain, I'm still very much alive, and I'm very much me. And how I wish with all my heart they knew this fact. I hear the nurse telling my mother that it's not the time to be visiting a patient, but my mother puts her firmly in her place. "My daughter is in a coma. If I want to see her now, I will. Do you understand?" "I didn't see anything," says the nurse, and quickly hurries away. I can hear 2 chairs squeaking as they're dragged over the floor to my side. "Hello, sweetheart. I've got a visitor here for you today who's dying to see you. It's Eli. Isn't it wonderful, dear, to have him here? He misses you so dreadfully much." My heart sinks. So this is what my mother's doing behind my father's back, secretly bringing Eli, my ex-fiancé, to see me. The nerve of the woman. Eli is the last person in the world I want to see while I'm trapped in my body in a hospital bed. "I don't recognize her," says Eli to my mother. Poor JJ. She looks quite dreadful." "It's that god-awful husband of hers. I don't know why she didn't marry you, Eli. This would never have happened under your watch. That husband of hers is so unreliable.
Lets her do whatever the hell she likes. And sometimes JJ is her own worst enemy.
I can feel a large pair of warm hands holding mine and giving them a big squeeze. I want to retract them. I know Eli's holding my hand, and I'm squirming on the inside, desperate to retract my fingers, but my body just won't react.
I miss you, JJ,
comes Eli's deep voice.
We were so good together, the two of us. And then you ended it and went and married a man who is not taking care of you properly. I knew that would happen. Your mother is right. This would never have happened on my watch. I would never have let you go out walking in the middle of the night like that. What is wrong with your husband? Has he got a screw loose or something? You were foolish to marry a man like that. But one day we can rectify things when you get out of this coma.
I wanted to scream. That's why I never wanted to marry you, Eli. You were suffocating. My husband Piers gives me space to breathe. He allows me to make my own decisions without casting any judgment on me. But you're the opposite in every way. Later that day I can smell the familiar aftershave of my husband, and my heart leaps with joy as he pulls a chair up beside me and cradles my fingers in his. These are hands that I want to hold.
I've got some very good news for you, sweetheart,
he tells me as he sits next to my bed, pulling up his chair close to me and holding my hand in his. His hand feels so lovely and warm. I feel so safe when he holds me.
I saw the villainous wolf-like humanoid that left you for dead on that road. Oh, I know it was him. I've never seen anything like it before. But I've been doing some research online. I think you might have been attacked by a dogman. I woke up last night to find the ignoble, diabolical creature staring in at me through the living room window. By all accounts, our animals appeared to know he was out there. They were cowering. Maddox was hiding in our closet. The other 3 of our animals were hiding under the bed. I've never seen them so discomposed before. I should have been terrified of this demonical creature. I mean, it was actually smiling at me, haughtily through the window. Can you believe it? It was actually smiling. It was even drooling. It was as if he was saying that he wanted to eat me. I was fueled with such an incandescent anger, I ran outside with my rifle, not even concerning myself with my own safety. I didn't care about trivial things like that. The creature literally lunged towards me, but I began to shoot at him. I know I got him in the femoral artery. I'm sure of it. The creature screamed, whimpered. He ran into the woods, clutching his leg. I knew he was dead. There was so much blood in the woodgrove this morning when I walked around there. But I couldn't find his body anywhere. It mysteriously just vanished. The great news is, JJ, everything's back to normal at home. The energy has lifted. The atmosphere is so much better. The animals sense the monster has gone. And they're back to themselves. I've even managed to make poached chicken for the cats that they actually eat. Turns out you don't poach chicken breasts for 1.5 hours. No wonder they didn't like it. All that's needed now is for you to get better and to come home. And the sooner the better as far as I'm concerned. As I'm lying there comatose, my husband's mention of that wolf-like creature brings on a memory that I did not want to recall. And then my mind plays it back in my head like a movie. I'd been sitting on the couch that evening, marking books, and as any teacher will tell you, that can be a laborious job. I'd been sitting in the same position for so long that I felt cramped. I rose up from my chair, once the last textbook had been marked, and I told my husband that I was taking the dogs for a walk. They were naturally delighted. "Are you sure it's a good idea? Can't it wait until the morning?" My husband goes through the usual motions of discouraging me, but he knows when my mind is made up, wild horses won't stop me, and if I want to take the dogs out for a walk, I'll do it. If I was married to Eli Conray, of course, he would have confiscated my freedom. I loved our home in the countryside, and I thoroughly enjoyed walking at night. It was always uplifting, very pleasant. The dogs are bounding ahead of me with tails wagging. It's a fabulously beautiful evening, and the road is very quiet, while the soft shafts of moonlight pierce through the sky with a friendly, magnanimous luminescence. I'm wearing my headlamp on my head and walk down the road strewn with pebbles and rocks. I'm not worried about cars at this time of night, for the road reaches a cul-de-sac, where a sumptuously thick wood grove fringes its far side. I feel relieved to be stretching my legs, and the fresh air is blowing against my face, almost kissing my cheeks. This evening is steeped in a bodeful, unfathomable silence, as if the night itself has swallowed up all its sound. I'm missing the cheerful chatter of the crickets and frogs that would normally brightly serenade the night with their happy trills, but their sounds have become mute. I am struck with the uneasy feeling that plunders my instincts rudely, like a cold blast of icy water being thrown across my face. Something's not right about this evening. I'm getting the chilling impression that something is watching us, and the foreboding feeling is sending wasp-like stinging sensations down my spine. My dogs begin to react, very strangely, and not in a good way. Maddox begins to growl, and my little Yorkshire Terrier is cowering and whimpering in the road, his little body trembling in terror. I realise that they too sense that something is really off. I've never seen Maddox growl at anything before, apart from the time when my cat was sniffing around his bowl. But this is very different. All of a sudden I smell it before I actually see it. To date I have never smelt such an obnoxious, repugnant, vile smell. There are no words to describe it. It was the smell of death and decay, with sulphurous connotations. And that was when I saw him. He moves away from the tree line. My first thought is, what the hell is that? And it would seem the generous moonlight this evening spared me no mercy, for the dark shadows did nothing to conceal its hideous form, as it moved boldly towards me. It looked like a demon that someone had summoned from the depths of hell. This creature was diabolical. He was cloaked in an insidious evil that was so tangible I could feel his hate, as much as I might feel my dog nuzzling my leg. You would have thought that the adrenaline would have coursed through my veins and worked its way through my bloodstream as it's supposed to do, so that I'd be able to run away. But it did not cooperate with me. I could see my dogs weren't hanging around for a single moment, as their adrenal response had not failed them, as mine so clearly had. They darted away in terror back to the farmhouse, but not me. I stood there like a dumb waxwork statue in Madame Tussauds, unable to move a single muscle. I can't even think properly. I can't react in any way. The creature has locked my eyes into his in what I can only describe as a hypnotic kind of control that has rendered me helpless. Every part of me is screaming, "Run! Run! Run! This creature is going to kill you!" My body fails to cooperate with my brain. It stubbornly refuses to oblige my obsequious instincts. "Run! Run!" my mind continues to scream. But still my body does not budge. I feel a fear so dreadful that there would be new words that would need to be created or conjured up for the English dictionary to express those feelings that I felt at that moment, as indeed there is no language that would be expressive enough to articulate the level of dread that consumed me. I can feel the raindrops of sweat pouring down my face, my heart thundering violently in my ears, my body trembling like a jelly, my teeth chattering, and my breathing becoming laboured. But still, I don't run. The next thing I know is the creature is on top of me. I feel my flesh being torn to shreds by its claws. The pain is excruciating. I want it to end. I try to scream, but nothing comes out of my mouth. Slowly, I surrender to my fate. The creature suddenly darts away for some unfathomable reason, of which I cannot explain. And I remember nothing after that. The shocking memory of my dramatic experience hammers itself into my mind so hard, like a nail through a wooden panel. It's so dramatic, and so is my reaction. My heart rate increases on the monitor, and my husband screams out, "Call the doctor! My wife has just opened her eyes! She's blinked! Call the doctor!" It would seem the fearful memory had brought on some kind of physical reaction in my body, and slowly but surely, in the days that followed, I came around from my coma. "What happened?" The doctor asked my husband. I was talking about the accident, Doc. Then she just opened her eyes like that. This is very good news, says the doctor. Very good news indeed. To cut a long story short, I recovered fully from my coma, and the doctors described me as a miracle. But I believe the memory of the creature and the fear it engendered enabled my body to be almost shocked out of its coma, like an electric shock treatment of some kind. All these years later, my mother still believes I should have married Eli, and I can never make her see that Piers is the love of my life. So some things have not changed. But one thing definitely has. When it's dark, I don't take my dogs for a walk on the road, even if I do fancy a stretch. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.